to thank Laura for her help this morning, and she reminded us that it's hard for us to see on the right side, so I put on, he's the designer, very good, designed to do that. We're going to begin by hearing about a class that comes after Easter, which is a nice postscript or a nice follow-up to meeting Jesus again for the first time. So I invited Kate to share with us, give us a taste of this book and make us excited to take the class.
I hope so. It really is a wonderful follow-up to meeting Jesus again for the first time. These authors are part of the West Star Institute, which formed what they called the Christianity Seminar after some years after the conclusion of the Jesus Seminar. So the Jesus Seminar is the group out of which Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan and others have written. And what they have done is brought together the past 30 years of research on early Christianity, which they saw as the gap really in the master narrative that Borg talks about. In other words, the narratives, whichever one you choose, and I think there are several, indicate that there was sort of a seamless progression from Jesus's life and teachings to the orthodox views that people adopted and transformed in various ways over the centuries. And what they wanted to do was just set the master narratives aside and go back to the pure research on the first 200 years, and saw that those first 200 years were anything but unified, that Jesus's life had spawned several innovative groups who did not consider themselves Christians or Jesus peoples necessarily. So that is that's a high level view of this book, and I think it'll be really rich coming on the heels of this one.
Can I add something about that? I was not familiar with this book until I this week saw that the class was going to be offered, and so I went digging to find reviews of the book, and was just really impressed with the breadth of people from different varieties of biblical scholars who all said, whether they agreed with it or not, that you should read this book. Wow. Yeah, right. And so I was quite impressed. I'm really looking forward to being a recipient of this class. So there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done on the first a couple of centuries of Christianity. There are a lot of documents out there that it may exist in only one or two copies, but we know they date from that period. And it'll be fascinating to be able to hear what these scholars have to say about those documents.
Yeah, thanks. And looking forward to your contributions too, Michael. You bring a lot to it.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay, that's exciting. Wish I could buy locate. So I'm going to begin with a text from Wisdom of Solomon describing Sophia. And I've always loved Sophia for the name. I think it's a beautiful name. My father was also a philosopher, so I learned early on that it's a love of wisdom, is what philosophy is. So what is wisdom? She is intelligent, holy, unique, subtle, flowing, transparent, and pure. Keen, irresistible, and gracious. Sophia is humane, faithful, sure, calm, all-powerful, all-seeing, and available to all who are intelligent, pure, and altogether simple. Sophia is the mobility of moments. She is the mobility of moment. She is the transparent nothing that pervades all things. She is the breath of God, a clear emanation of divine glory. Although she is one, she does all things. Without leaving herself, she renews all things. Generation after generation, she slips into holy souls, making them friends of God and prophets. And that's Polly Murray, who we're learning more and more about. Wonderful person. Now this is, I believe it's Marcus Borg's words, but I put the screen up and I didn't go back to check. But anyway, I think this is his words. Sophia, the wisdom woman, is the personification of God. She is essentially prophetic. Sophia was with God from the beginning. Sophia is not simply personification of wisdom in female form, but a female image for God, the lens through which divinity, which divine reality is imaged as a woman. And so the rest of the PowerPoint, the slides will be Borg's words. I guess not, this is proper, sorry. I'll try reading it sometime. Okay. Yahweh created me, Sophia, at the beginning of God's work, the first of God's acts of long ago. When God established the heavens, I was there. When God marked out the foundations of the earth, I was beside God as a master, that should be master worker. Sophia's child, Jesus declared this when he was dealing with his critics. Marcus Borg points this out. Jesus says, John the Baptizer has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, behold, a glutton and a wino, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And this is the key word, key sentence. Yet Sophia is vindicated by her children. Borg points out that the centrality of banquets and banquet imagery, especially Jesus' festive meals with outcasts, may be connected to Sophia. And in this artistic rendering, someone is leaning over. Now, that could be Mary, but I'm going to think of it as Sophia, leaning over Jesus and guiding him. It must be Mary. This is the wedding at Cana. I just saw the big pots. But I like to think that Sophia is right there, guiding him. Marcus Borg also points out the significance of Paul. And this is a more intricate discussion, I think. And I had to read it a few times just to really follow his argument, Borg's argument. But he is right. Paul is, again, next to Jesus, Paul is the most important person in the history of early Christianity. And the genuine letters of Paul, all written in the 15 years before his execution in Rome around the year 64, are our earliest witness to the early Christian movement. Yet beneath the differences between Paul's writings and the Gospels, and we really should have another class on Paul because he has a lot to say. But between the differences between Paul's writings and the Gospels, there's a striking similarity between the message of Paul and the subversive and alternative wisdom of Jesus, which is what you all talked about last week, with its emphasis upon compassion, upon the compassionate spirit of God. And I think I might have to pass the baton to Michael in a minute, because he goes into an intricate discussion of justification. And basically not saying you're innocent, but it is saying that you are made right with God. Can you say anything more about that word?
Oh, just that the word that he's referring to in Greek is the word that you would use in a court of law when you pronounce the sentence. If the person is in the right, then you would use that verb that he's discussing, which is dikeo, which it means to declare right or just or not. Is just, but also right in the sense of being in right relationship with the law, right? Well, Paul uses it for right relationship with God, of course, and so it's, I think Borg is right on target here. It's a legal term that Paul takes over and uses for the purpose of describing our relationship with God.
So no longer justified by works, we're justified by grace. And Paul explicitly used wisdom language to describe these different ways: life under law, conventional wisdom, versus life under grace. In 1 Corinthians, when he says the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. This really helps me with understanding what Paul is doing there. The wisdom of the world, the wisdom of God. Now, the prologue to the Gospel of John, and I would probably need Michael's help again, is one of the most beautiful passages in Scripture. I wonder, do you have a Bible with you? Anybody?
I have it on my phone. Yes.
Because it would be nice to hear it read with Sophia in the language, but in the.
So you want to just have it read with substitute Sophia for word and change the gender?
Yes.
All right.
But before we do that, let's just hear from Marcus, and then I want to hear the text read. It's important in these opening verses of the gospel not to think of word or logos as referring to Jesus, if by Jesus we mean Jesus of Nazareth. Reading it as Jesus is unconsciously encouraged both by later doctrine of the Trinity and by the use of the masculine pronouns in the Greek original and English translations. So scholars have long noted the close relationship between what is said about Sophia in the Jewish tradition. Sophia was present with God from the beginning, active in creation. Oops. And I can't see.
And is present in the created world.
So they seem very, very close together. So let's just hear this beautiful passage read with Sophia and see how it affects the reception or the feeling of the text.
And I think you want to skip the John the Baptist pieces.
Yeah.
Okay. In the beginning was Sophia, and Sophia was with God, and Sophia was God. She was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through her, and without her, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in her was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. She was in the world, and the world came into being through her, yet the world did not know her. She came to what was her own, and her own people did not accept her. Skip to 14. And Sophia became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen her glory, the glory as of a father's only daughter, full of grace and truth.
Yeah, it does something for me to hear that and to hear the feminine. I also love the word logos because the creation was made through sound. God spoke creation into existence. So the word logos is very powerful for me too. So I'm kind of torn, but I wonder what you would say, Michael.
Well, I think Board kind of hints at this, that you have parallel discussions going on. You had within Judaism this rich wisdom tradition. They talked about the wisdom of God. And of course, once Greek becomes the dominant language in the area, that they're using the word Sophia, right? Outside Palestine, in the Greek philosophical tradition, you had this discussion of logos that paralleled in really closely to the wisdom tradition in Judaism, but they referred to the logos because logos is an amazing word in ancient Greek that had many meanings at the same time. And one, of course, is literally something that I say, but another is also that we could translate it as reason. What we would think in our philosophical tradition is reason. And so the Greek philosophical tradition used logos for that. And so this hymn is, if you're reading it in a Jewish context, it comes across as talking about wisdom, but in the Greek context outside early Judaism, you'd hear it as talking about reason, right? Which is, so it's an interesting interplay. And it's interesting because Sophia is feminine and reason is masculine, right? And so you get both images, and I think the hymn. And by the way, skipping the whole section on John the Baptist, is many biblical scholars see this as very possibly an early Christian hymn. Right, that the final editor of John has pulled in, and of course that part about John the Baptist was not a part of the hymn, right? And so it's I think very appropriate to read it that way if we're thinking back to what was it before it became a part of John's gospel. Right?
Thank you.
Stephanie,
Yeah,
can I add something?
sure.
In more modern reading, certainly in the school of those that you may have heard, the universal Christ or the cosmic Christ, the emphasis in the reading of John is more, and the Word was God.
Yeah.
The emphasis then is the inseparability of all of these different dimensions of God.
Ah.
And in sort of the interpretation of Trinity, it's the same kind of thing. It was, we tend to see it only through an Orthodox view, and we don't see the parts that people were trying to bring together in a dynamic whole. So we can't separate out. But in fact, they were trying to add Jesus in, right? The God incarnate, adding that into the concept of God. So that's just another way of looking at it, I think.
Yes, that's very helpful. And I think part of the point that Board was making is that if we read John, if we're paying attention in the text, he doesn't say, it's not that he says the Logos is Jesus. What he says is that the Logos becomes incarnate in Jesus. In other words, the Logos is there before Jesus of Nazareth, right? And the Logos takes physical form in Jesus. And so what Board is warning us against is reading the hymn as if it's saying Jesus was in the beginning. Right? It's not that Jesus was in the beginning, it's the Logos was in the beginning, and Jesus personifies that Logos. Right? And so he's just cautioning us to not historicize the Logos, if you will, not make Jesus the Logos in a literal sense, but to think of Jesus as embodying the Logos. I don't know if that's helpful, but
that's good. That's good.
Right.
Folks, can you hear me? This is
Yeah.
Maria. I am sorry. I just realized I was not on mute, and you probably have been hearing my car rumbling. I
No,
apologize.
it's been fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking of the wisdom. It hit me when Stephanie said, "Oh no, that's Mary. That's not wisdom." And I think, oh, wait a minute. Mary is speaking wisdom, is personifying wisdom. He's saying, this is the time to do something. And I think what you're saying about Jesus personifying the wisdom of God, I think of in the beginning was the grace and wisdom of God. In the beginning, all the qualities were there, and we beheld those qualities in Jesus. You know, they became flesh, and I think we behold them in other people, and they become the grace or the wisdom of God. You know, we talk about prophets embodying the wisdom of God, and I think I think it's very beautiful to think of God's wisdom taking human form, not just once. I mean, I'm not saying we can all be Jesus, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. It's when Jesus says, "I'm leaving the Holy Spirit with you," and isn't that part of what we believe, that and we're gonna do greater things than He did? Do we believe or that we can become or closer to the wisdom of God, or can embody it more? And I'd love to think that mothers personify some of the love and wisdom of God, you know, if children would only listen to us.
Well, I just thank you. That's really helpful too. I like that Mary was wisdom speaking, whispering to Jesus, "This is your time. This is your time." So I have 2 more slides. It's just helpful to think even more about this metaphorical understanding rather than literal. And this is what Ward writes. For early Christianity, Jesus was the Son of the Father and the incarnation of Sophia, the child of the intimate Abba and the child of Sophia. And he goes on to say, it's useful to think that the dominance of father-son imagery reflects the fact that Trinitarian thinking took shape in a patriarchal and androcentric culture. And so we have that right there, father, son, and a dove. Male, 2 male images and an image that's not really sexualized. So strikingly, Son of God and Sophia of God are both found in the early stages of the movement's developing traditions. And so that'll be important to see how the book that you're going to teach, Kate, puts flesh on that too.
That by the way, that imagery of the dove, the early church, and I really hope, I haven't read the book yet, but I really hope the book will get into this issue, that as the church became accepted by the Roman government, there was an enormous push to eliminate feminine imagery, right? And one thing that goes by the wayside of that is picturing wisdom as a woman. Instead, wisdom becomes pictured as a dove. You see how this is? So the change of image just erases the feminine from the picture, right? And you have a huge movement like that. There's a wonderful little book called When Women Were Priests, because we know we have absolute clear evidence that women were priests in the early church. It's when it becomes adopted as an official, it becomes officially sanctioned by the Roman Empire that suddenly you don't have women priests anymore. Right? It's a part of that, what we might call defeminization of Christianity that happens under Roman authority. And so it's I hope we'll see some about that in that. I don't know, I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know how much of that we will see.
We will, Michael. We'll see some of that. In fact, I think that, in order to be accepted as part of empire, it had to conform. The movement had to conform to Russian norms. I'm Russian. Yeah, Roman.
That's a wonderful slip.
I know. And then we also say that the authors go into what they call gender fluidity among early groups in the first 2 centuries. It's very interesting research findings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is my last slide, and it's, I always have trouble with her first name, saying it. Kintenji?
Yeah, I think.
Kintenji.
Yeah.
Brown Jackson. Just what I overheard, I listened to a lot of her testimony over NPR, so I didn't get to see those critical faces like Ted Cruz in this photo, but I thought she was exemplar of Sophia. She was composed, she was grateful, she spoke truth. Anyway, I'm praying for her as she gets voted on tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I wonder what your thoughts are reading this chapter and thinking about this feminine face of God.
Do you mind if I jump in with something that's related, but not?
Sure. Of course, that's
Okay,
great.
so it's a little bit of a story, but I'll keep it short. So last Saturday, I had the great privilege of attending a conference remotely that was where Francis Collins was the plenary speaker. He's the former director of NIH. And he shared his experience with what had happened with the vaccines and the heartbreak of a lot of people of religion essentially turning against science, turning against scientists. And he really was at a loss as to why people were doing this. And so he's trying to understand like how this all happened. And he's been talking to a guy who owns this trucking firm in Minnesota, who is far right in his political beliefs and his mistrust of science, and yet wants to create dialogue. And in the end of the lecture, Francis Collins said, he wanted us to think about a web of beliefs, and the beliefs that we had that were core were in the center. And he said, but instead of addressing those webs, which were so different, like his core beliefs were so different from this other guy's beliefs. But he said, if you think of what a web is attached to, and he said, I want to be thinking about those pillars that web is attached to as Sophia. So we have, the pillar of beauty, the pillar of love, the pillar of family, the pillar of faith. And he's sort of thinking that if we are able as a community to focus on those pillars of Sophia, instead of on the strands in the web, that maybe we can actually have some helpful discussion. So anyway, I just thought that was, to talk about Sophia in that way, I thought it was really an interest. So it's not really what you're talking about, but it just triggered that in me, and I just wanted to share it with y'all. It was a great discussion Great lecture.
Well, that's very rich. Adds something about very valuable to the discussion of what's in the chapter. I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting reframing. Think about
Yeah.
pillars rather than web.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we think about talking about webs of knowledge and things, we tend to not think about what it's built on.
Yes.
But I think it is very related to what we're talking about, the idea that the wisdom of God can bring us together. The pillars of wisdom are, appreciating beauty, appreciating family, appreciating seeing goodness. What I'm having a hard time making the jump to thinking that will bring us together. I come from a very small, not very small by rural standards, but a small school. My graduating class in Lima had about 60 some girls in it, and most of them were together from kindergarten through 12th grade. I started in 3rd grade, left in 11th, but they brought me back to graduate me with that class. We have stayed connected and together, and by all the things that we were taught by growing up together. And the first classmate to die, well, no, we had one who died in a car accident, but the second classmate to died from COVID. She married a guy from Texas, moved to Texas, became a right-wing Christian, anti-vaxxer, treated herself with that horse medicine, and died, and left two college-age girls, and at the beginning of the pandemic. And when I got together with my classmates last year, we were at a loss on how to grieve, how to even relate, we grew up together, we loved Magali, we had so much in common, and it was like she had rejected wisdom. It was almost like it was an unrecognizable form of Christianity for the rest of us, where she had pictures on Facebook with the American flag, and talking about Trump saving democracy. And how do we could not, it was like a gulf, like she had abandoned wisdom and beauty and love, and it was, the grief was not so much on her death, but on how she died, alienated. I don't know. It was just the most, I'm even wanting to cry now, just thinking of what happened to her. And I just don't know how wisdom, it really felt like it was turning away from the wisdom of God was a bigger sin than turning away from the expression of Christianity. And maybe how Jesus said, well, who said, Michael, that denying the Holy Spirit is an unforgivable sin or something like that? It's almost like saying, I'm not going to be enlightened by God. I'm not going to accept wisdom from God. I'm going to only follow the words I want from Jesus. I'm going to pick and choose. I'm not going to see the beauty in other people. And I don't know if I'm communicating what I'm feeling, but it is like shutting out the wisdom of God.
Well,
I did not mean to shock you all into.
we're just thinking,
Yeah, you've given us I think we all know people who have gone through a similar transformation, and so you've brought to even to me, even some of my own family into mind in that in what you've said, and it is really hard. I mean, how do you have dialogue with them when what I perceive as wisdom is something that they've utterly rejected, right? How do you open that dialogue again?
Yeah. Well, I struggle with that in my own family. My sister's an anti-vaxxer, and just yesterday we got into it. And yeah, but she has reasons for her feelings, but it has become a single issue for her, and so it's becoming sad to me to think that when my mother dies, I will no longer have the same kind of intellectual partner in my family. You know, it's just, she's smart. My sister's very smart, but she has just closed down. She's got blinders on, is what I feel like.
Do you think that humility is part of wisdom, that perhaps certainty it becomes a sin, that wisdom learns even from not just our mistakes, but treats mistakes with kindness in everybody, and is open to the wisdom of humility? I remember when the Vatican told some of the liberation theologians to stop writing, and I was so mad and thought they should defy the Vatican, and several said they would abide by the order and seek wisdom and understanding while, not writing, or I don't know. And I thought, oh my gosh, what kind of people have that much grace and discipline and love to say this is something good will come out of this, I don't know. The humility they needed to do that, I did not possess.
That's actually helpful to me, Maria, because I think I need to go to my sister with more humility. Not that I'm going to agree with her, but just not just be perturbed.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the bottom line is there's no way you can argue someone into hearing truth if they are set in what they are believing. And I think humility is one of the pillars of wisdom. And so I think what Francis Collins was trying to say is he's trying to focus more on the pillars than what's in the web. I mean, he was devastated, obviously, and working with Anthony Fauci. It's heartbreaking. He almost cried during the lecture. I mean, you can imagine. These are people of faith who are not only dead set against it for themselves, but they're trying to undermine other people and causing senseless deaths like Maria's friend, a close friend. So anyway, yeah.
It reminds me of the saying, I'm not sure who said it, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty.
Yeah.
That's good.
I like that.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
in all of these thoughts, I've also been thinking about this concept of how do you gain wisdom? Because oftentimes with the feminine personification of wisdom, we see wisdom as inspirational, something that comes to us and is manifest in a way that is appreciation, of beauty and art. All of these things that are very sort of more inspirational in our minds, which is often separated with the intellectual pursuit, which can often be seen as more historically more masculine. So often I see it as presented as a dichotomy. You have inspiration and then you have academics. And at the same time, you have wisdom and then you have scripture. And a lot of times I see them as really separated. And so it is very interesting to think about people operating on the idea that they have been given wisdom from a higher place and operating as they see fit, and how oftentimes, especially now, that is put in opposition to, I'm going to say experts, shall we say, this idea that, or what many of us would see as academic pursuit or academic excellence or excellence based in research. So you have these sort of people who are operating on the idea of personal wisdom, or God has revealed to me this path that I should take, that might be in opposition to this other experienced, more expert path, because I have been given this personal revelation of wisdom. And it is very interesting to sort of think about this idea of how do we perceive wisdom as not only being gained, but how is that manifest? So if you're talking about the pillars of wisdom, who builds those pillars? So it becomes this idea of how we as a country have developed our understanding of where do we base our knowledge? Like where are we putting those initial pillars? How are they being built up? And is that wisdom coming from a misplaced feeling of the importance of personal revelation, or is it coming from some other place? And how do we attach that to the idea of wisdom and the acquisition of knowledge? And I realize that I've been rambling. Sorry. I kind of have a lot of different thoughts, and sometimes, especially in the morning, those thoughts do not come out.
I think one thing that really hits me, and it matches what Kate was saying. You know, when you're talking about humility changes everything, because if I'm not humble, and I'm doing my own research, right? So I know better than the experts do, right?
Yeah.
But if I have the attitude of humility of I'm going to listen to others, I'm going to be open to really hear what others are saying. I mean, it's just a tremendous difference between the two.
That's good.
I think that was just a beautiful statement of the issue of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
How do you trust that the information you're getting is right?
Yeah.
And I think there are people who believe that if it is totally outside of your experience, it does not comport with your lived experience, then you will reject it. So, you know, I think in the case of the anti-vaxxers, for instance, you have people who do not trust that information. And it's in that I think describes our differences. How do they not trust it, and yet others do? And I think that goes pretty deep, right?
I think it does.
Yeah.
And I think people take this idea of what does it mean to be an American, in that our history is a flouting of authority. You know, what does it mean to be an individual? What does it mean to fight for what you believe? And then sort of turning it on its head and saying, well, look how much more of an American I am because I'm fighting for what I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I live in a very red state. Pray for me now and always.
And America was founded on, you're not the boss of me.
Yes. By the way, that I've always been a bit puzzled by that value in our culture, that it's a good thing to fight for what you believe in, because really it's a good thing to fight for what you believe in only if what you believe in is a good thing, right? If
Right.
what you believe in,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, if what you believe in is an evil thing, right, then fighting for it is not such a good thing, right? So I'm always puzzled by how you can hold the view that fighting for what you believe in and of itself is a good thing, right? It's like, really? I don't know. But it is something that people say in our culture just as if it's a given.
Mhm.
Right, that it's a good thing to fight for what you believe in, and I'm like,
Right. And and
really?
how are those beliefs
Yeah.
built? And and what part does wisdom play? And is wisdom merely inspiration, or is wisdom based in study and research and talking to other people who are considered wise? And how are those wise people heralded within our society is also a really interesting part of the conversation, because do we as a society value wise people?
Yeah. And I think what Borg does with contrasting more than one wisdom, right? We have conventional wisdom, and then the alternative wisdom of Jesus is a very helpful thing to me, because there's a lot that passes for wisdom, which is really conventional wisdom, right? And where Jesus is going is saying that's not always a good thing, right? That sometimes we need an alternative to that wisdom that our culture agrees is wise. Right, that conventional wisdom. I liked how he presented that, of the contrast between conventional wisdom and the wisdom that Jesus is putting forward. They're two different things.
And one other thing too is, I think wisdom, it's interesting to me that Maria brought up the whole story of the priests being told not to delve into this area of research. I think that fear of fear of the unknown is anti-wisdom. So just a thought I wanted to.
Yeah.
I think it's important too to see the shift in our conversation. From the wisdom of God to cultural belief.
Yes.
But there's no, all of those things that, what we learn, what others think, what we personally experience, all of those things need to have some pillars, need to have some compass.
Yes.
And if you're a believer, some contemplation in what is of God and what is not.
Yes.
And we do not have that common understanding culturally, right?
No.
We don't share that experience.
Right.
That's true.
But I think if you went into any church across the United States and you asked them, is love a good thing? Is truth a good thing? I mean, I think we do have common ground. It's just how we interpret.
Yes. Right. But we have some very common professed values, right? But sometimes it's really hard to pin down exactly what we mean by those values. And so we would all agree, for example, that love is a core value and should be for a person of faith. But then what does that imply? How should I act? How should I, and you never get to a completely agreed upon answer to those questions. I think the part of what our faith calls us to is a continuing dialogue around them, because you're never going to get to full agreement on what is the loving thing to do in every circumstance, right? There's going to be different interpretations of that, but I think you're absolutely right that we would all, in any church in America, you ask if is love a good thing, they're going to say yes, right? But then we have to do the work of fleshing out what that is.
Well,
And,
But I think Francis Collins would say, is there a way that we can connect with that and say to each other, well, wait a minute, let's make sure we're speaking to each other in a loving way.
yes.
So anyway, he's hoping that we can find these common ground elements.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
one.
we need to find things to do together, to action. I know, but I'm arriving at Baptist Hospital, so I'm going to have to say goodbye in about 2 minutes. But when Benji transferred from Asheville to upstate in Boone, he found himself in a program with a lot of Christian kids, because he was in parks and recreation and outdoor leadership and things that attract kids that have been Eagle Scouts and have tried, and a couple were planning on being missionaries and using recreation to reach out to youth. And he was blown away by the love and commitment of these people who had nothing in common with socially with him, who couldn't believe that his mother was a pastor, who couldn't believe that there were gay people in his church, but who invited him to Wednesday night dinners for the college students. And since he was a hungry college student, he went, and he became really good friends. And he really came down on people in Chapel Hill when he would hear them talking about the idiots, this or that. He would say, no, they're not idiots. You know, he really found a way to relate and to form bonds. And he has helped some of those kids come a long ways in understanding inclusive language and things that they have come to him and said, Benji, I don't understand this. What are they talking about? I'm in trouble with, I want this job, but they're saying this and I'm not getting what they're saying. And it has been just amazing. So I do think, and I think that's one reason why I believe in campus ministry so strongly. And and also in ministries that bring people together, to do things like Habitat or going to Haiti and helping, because I think we all agree that helping starving people or disaster victims or whatever, or hungry college students is worth doing. And then that can form the basis for how we relate. We just have to find spaces to come together, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a nice benediction, I think,
Yes.
for all of us today. And blessings, Maria, as you ministered to this family you're going to be meeting with.
Yes. Wish you well.
Yeah. I think she unhooked already.
Yeah.
She's still there. Oh, she is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
thank you all for
Thank
being
you.
here. And again, next week we'll be looking at the last chapter, and that chapter, of course, is centered around what does all this mean for the Christian life, right? What does it mean for the life of faith? Once we've kind of done some shifting in our view of the historical Jesus and the Christ of faith, and now what does that mean for us as a community and living out our faith? And so that'll be next week. I look forward to seeing you all.
And I have to say, I won't be here next week.
Oh, yes, that's right. You had said that, and I'd
Well,
forgotten that. Yeah, yeah,
Because I need to be with the children, so.
right.
um,
Okay.
but-
Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Stephanie,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
for
you.
your work in this class.
Yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
for your leadership today. This has been great.
So thankful for Laura getting us all on Zoom. Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.
Let me see.